You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Oh yeah, baby, that's lovely.
Good morning, it's August 11th, and welcome to Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News. I'm live here at paceradio.net and 420pace.ca. As you notice, I am alone by myself. No Cindy today, actually. I won't have no Cindy for the next 6 weeks. Cindy is off out in BC, and she is there doing some education and training on more psychedelics therapy. So she will be busy for the next little while. Meanwhile, either I'll be doing the news by myself or one of the hosts here on the network will be filling in for Cindy and helping me with the news. Other than that, I still have 8 cannabis and psychedelic stories and articles with information that everybody could use. Everybody is always looking for new information in order to share with others. So we will be doing that in the process. So to get things started, we're going to head south. We're going to head down to the U.S. to see what's going on down there as far as when it comes to cannabis. At the federal level. And the first story comes to us from Marijuana Moment. Headline says Trump says he's going to look at marijuana as White House Chief of Staff receives rescheduling reports. President Donald Trump's administration is currently weighing whether to move forward with the marijuana rescheduling process initiated under the Biden administration, with the president recently telling donors that we need to look at the issue according to reports. That's something we're going to look at, Trump says, at a $1 million a plate fundraising dinner at his Bedminster, New Jersey club recently, according to the CNN and the Wall Street Journal. Now, the comments come as cannabis industry observers have waited for signals on whether the administration will follow through on the president's campaign pledge to reschedule cannabis. Now, TrueLive CEO Kim Rivers was in attendance at the dinner where Trump briefly discussed cannabis this month, and the White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson told CNN that all policy and legal requirements and implications are being considered when it comes to cannabis. The only interest guiding the president's policy decision is what is best interest of the American people, she says. Now, according to CNN, there is a dissent within the administration when it comes to cannabis, with some observers urging the president to take action on the popular campaign pledge, and others cautioning that the moral and legal ramifications of loosening cannabis restrictions could outweigh the potential gains and even backfire politically. Now, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles has requested key agencies to submit their positions on cannabis rescheduling, with CNN citing 2 sources who said those responses now sit in a report on her desk after having been compiled by the Domestic Policy Council. While Trump endorsed rescheduling cannabis, as well as industry banking access and state-level legalization initiative in Florida, on the campaign trail last year, he's been silent about the issue since taking office for his second term. Now, newly published Federal Election Commission filings show that a cannabis industry-funded political committee donated $1 million to Trump's MAGA Inc. super PAC in the first half of this year. Now, TrueLive, whose CEO Rivers attended the recent dinner where Trump discussed cannabis contributed $250,000 to the industry PAC. The PAC also reported expenditures of $120,000 to a strategic consulting and research firm associated with Trump, Fabros and Lee Associates LLC, for legal services. The same firm conducted a survey of registered voters that showed a majority of Republicans back a variety of cannabis reforms that is promoted on the PAC's website. Now, the owner of the major gardening supply company, Scott's Miracle-Gro, recently said Trump has told him directly, multiple times since taking office, that he intends to see through on the marijuana rescheduling process. Now, earlier FEC records also previously showed that TrueLive and Curaleaf contributed a total of $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee following his election last November. Now, Trump's former acting head of the Drug Enforcement Agency also recently predicted that the administration will soon dig in to the state's federal cannabis policy conflict, emphasizing the need to eliminate confusion, not create it amid the rescheduling push. Meanwhile, Terrence Cole, who was sworn in last month as a new administrator of the DEA, declined to include rescheduling on a list of strategic priorities. The agency that instead focused on anti-trafficking enforcement, Mexican cartels, the fentanyl supply chain, drug-fueled violence, cryptocurrency, the dark web, and a host of other matters. That's despite the fact that Cole said during confirmation hearing in April that examining the government's pending cannabis rescheduling proposal would be one of my first priorities after taking office. We know how that made out. Now, earlier this week, former White House press secretary Sean Spicer predicted that Trump would not legalize cannabis, though that is a separate issue from the rescheduling proposal under construction. Yes, it is a different issue than the rescheduling, but it is still an issue. It's still federally illegal, and people are being penalized for it. And I can see where the confusion could come in. The state that has it legal and another state that doesn't have it legal, and people can get severely punished in one state and not punished at all, but encouraged in another state. So I think they have to get that straightened up. And talking about Sean Spicer, that just happens to be my next story. That's right. Let's find out what Sean says. And here's the headline here. This is coming to me from the Green State. It says, Insider, Trump insider, don't expect legal cannabis anytime soon. So what does Sean have to say? We, the insiders, can't agree on what Trump will do when it comes to cannabis legalization, but they're all making comments about it. Last week, Scott's Miracle-Gro CEO James Hagedorn, whose company has been profiting handsomely from legal cannabis, said the president told him on multiple occasions he'd reschedule cannabis, but one presidential insider is pushing back on those claims. Just in the last story, talked about the guy from Scott's Miracle-Gro. Says he'll do it. Well, now as reported, as I just read, in the marijuana moment, former White House press secretary Sean Spicer recently said cannabis reform is a no-go under Trump. During a conversation on his podcast, The Morning Meeting with co-host Mark Halperin, the topic of cannabis legalization came up. Spicer asserted, that's not going to happen. Halperin disagreed, saying, oh, it will. Oh, it will. Spicer insisted legalization wasn't in the cards. Not under this president. No. Spicer served in Trump's first administration, while the president may or may not have changed his tune on cannabis since then. The former press secretary was adamant that Trump was not planning full legalization. However, since rescheduling cannabis to Schedule 3 is not legalization, some type of reform could be possible without an act of Congress. The speculation on the federal cannabis reform has run rampant since Trump returned to Washington. Two industry insiders with the president's ear recently predicted he would indeed reclassify the plant. One thing that I learned from working with the president last time is that he usually keeps his word. If he says something, he does it. That's from Weldon Anglos, who he says he's the founder of Mission Green, and he was pardoned by Trump for cannabis-related conviction during his first term. Meanwhile, several multi-state operators in the cannabis space have tried to get in the president's good grace via donations to Trump's MAGA Inc. Political Action Committee. This includes hundreds of thousands of dollars from companies like Verano, Cureleaf, and Cresco Labs. Despite the pandering, it remains unclear if the Trump administration will appease the cannabis community. If Sean Spicer is correct, cannabis advocates will have to wait until the next president comes to power. There you go. Well, all we can do is find out in time, right? And action, sometimes it was louder than words, so watch what he does. And that's what I've been saying all along, because a lot of the people that he has been appointing are not pro-cannabis people. So, as Sean says, I'm just going to see. He doesn't expect it to happen. And honestly, I don't expect him to do it either. Not federally. He might go to a state-by-state thing, which to me is BS as far as I'm concerned. So, all right, on to the next story. Here I go. And this one comes to me from the Pain News Network. It says cannabis use by older adults linked to younger brains and improved cognition. Yeah, a new study suggests that cannabis use by older adults slows the aging of their brains and may improve cognitive function. An international research team analyzed extensive health data on over 25,000 adults in the UK, looking at the relationship between cannabis use, aging, and cognitive function. They found that cannabis users had brain characteristics typically associated with younger brains and enhanced cognitive abilities. Cannabis users exhibited superior performance across multiple cognitive domains. And interesting, the effects of cannabis and cognition are presented concurrently across a range of brain systems, the authors said. These findings suggest that cannabis use may be associated with deceleration of neural aging processes and the preservation of cognitive function in older adults. It's important to note that the study is a preprint published in Research Square, which means the findings have not yet been peer-reviewed by a medical journal and may undergo some changes. While it's common knowledge that cannabis can alter mood, cognition, and perception, researchers wanted to look at other potential impacts, particularly in older adults. Most previous studies investigating the effects of cannabis on brain function focused on adolescents and young adults. Due to legalization, cannabis is increasingly being used by older adults, and there's a growing recognition that cannabis can be used therapeutically to treat pain, insomnia, depression, and other conditions associated with old age. Normal aging typically involves a gradual decline in cognitive abilities, but when researchers compared the cognitive performance of cannabis users and non-users, they found that cannabis use had positive effects on most cognitive functions compared to normal aging. Cannabis users performed better in various cognitive tasks, including problem solving, planning skills, numeric memory, intelligence, and vocabulary. The effects where cannabis users outperformed non-users were evident across different age groups, starting in the middle age of 45 to 55 and continuing into old age. Researchers think cannabis enhances cognitive performance by improving how different parts of the brain communicate with each other, a process known as functional network cognitivity. Our findings reveal that cannabis usage and healthy aging are associated with overlapping brain network configurations, particularly within the FNC, between subcortical and sensory motor regions, as well as between subcortical and cerebral areas. Big words, sorry, can't get them out, folks. With a significant reverse effects, they said. The enhanced performance of these brain regions may be due to higher concentrations of cannabinoid receptors in brain tissue, which makes them responsive to cannabinoids such as THC and CBD. And researchers say the findings could lead to further research into whether cannabinoids and endocannabinoids could be used to treat multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and other neurodegeneration diseases. So there you go. Help with the aging of the brain, slow it down. And we're finding that out too with the mushrooms. And just keep doing the plugging away of the research, and hopefully bring out some stuff that that proves it all once and for all, and is in a large study, and one that they just can't say, oh, we need more studies, as they always seem to do when it comes to the cannabis and the things. All right, moving on to my next story, which is the last one before I go to break. And this one is coming to me from the International Cannabis Business Conference. Headline says, advocates push for private cannabis clubs in South Africa. South Africa is on a short but growing list of countries that have adapted national adult use cannabis legalization measures. South Africa is joined by Uruguay, Canada, Malta, Luxembourg, and Germany, which all adopted recreational cannabis legalization measures before South Africa. The Czech Republic also recently adopted a national legalization measure. Jeez, it's too bad the U.S. isn't mentioned in there. The modern adult legalization law in South Africa actually started in late 2018, when the nation's constitutional court deemed cannabis prohibition against private consumers to be unconstitutional. The landmark court decision was finally codified in 2024 by the nation's lawmakers. Policymakers and regulators are still working to properly set up South Africa's recreational cannabis industry, and if the advocates have their way, the nation's legalization model will expressly include private cannabis clubs. Now, according to the report, it says a new initiative to unify private cannabis clubs to lobby for legal recognition has just been launched. The South African Cannabis Club Alliance says the time is critical for the private club movement to speak with one voice ahead of the anticipated release of draft regulations that will empower the Cannabis for Private Purposes Act. Now, the SACCA's launch does come at a time of mounting pressure on authorities to draft regulations to combat the growing cannabis retail gray zone that the omniglot of thousands of unlicensed businesses dealing in cannabis across the country. To date, conflicting court decisions have cast clubs into a legal no man's land, where the best they can thrive or strive for in terms of compliance is to be technically not legal, the Outlook also reported. Now, it says, as part of its advocacy, the South African Cannabis Club Alliance has launched a website stating on it that the organization seeks to ensure that self-regulated cannabis clubs are formally recognized in future cannabis legislation, with compliance requirements embedded in the law to promote safety, transparency, and legitimacy. The SACCA is committed to an inclusive, transparent drafting process, inviting participation from a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including cultivators, legal experts, health professionals, traditional healers, activists, and community members. The South African Cannabis Club Alliance has created foundational documents that it is encouraging members of South Africa's emerging industry to weigh in on, and the drafting phase up for the document to remain open until February of 2026. And And at their website, it says, in March 2026, the finalized SACCA documents will be formally submitted to all relevant government departments as part of the push to recognize, for recognition and regulation of private cannabis clubs in South Africa. All right, here, because I know that in the past, there's been people here in Canada that have asked and pushed for cannabis clubs, and that way patients can go in there and participate, grow, and get part of the harvest. But unfortunately, it has not come to fruition, and all we can do is keep waiting and hopefully keep plugging away, and in due time things will change. So, but I am done my first 4 stories of the day. Time for me to take a break. Time for me to medicate. You're watching Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News and live here at paceradio.net and 420pace.ca. Gotta find the right button. Here we go.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. Open Monday to Friday from 10 till 7 p.m. or by chance. Check out our flags, our t-shirts, plus our hats, and look of that supply of rolling papers, plus much more. We've got bongs and your favorite herbal vaporizers. Look at all the incense we have, as well as for those who collect knives, check out these knives in our collection. And while you're here, stop in to see Shay at the piercing room, where you can get poked by Shay. Daily deals, check them out. Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford, Ontario. Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420. Re-rolled Saturdays. Check it out. Nothing but non-stop cannabis and psychedelic programming. Find it at 420pace.ca.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
And you're watching Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News. As you notice, I'm by myself today, and I will be on and off over the next 6 weeks, as Rev Sydney is out in British Columbia. She is doing some more training on psychedelic medicines, and she'll be back. I think it's scheduled about the 25th of September when she returns. And in the meantime, Steve is offered to fill in from time to time, and that's good. Other than that, we will continue on with the news. First story after the break comes to us from a well-known guy within the cannabis community, and that is because his court case led to huge changes on the cannabis front here in Canada, and that is Owen Smith. So here we go. This is his Substack. This was a letter, an article that I actually found in on another website, and I went right to the link to get the full story. And this is the legalizers. The cannabis industry's letter to PM Carney ignores its own role in the crisis. As I said, it is written by Owen Smith. Now, in June, over 70 cannabis executives signed a public letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney urging reforms to Canada's cannabis framework. They called for excise tax relief, nationalized stamps, and export strategies to help Canada lead the world. But the letter fails to mention the most critical factor in the collapse of trust in the legal market, the industry's own decisions. We've seen layoffs, inflated executive bonuses, lawsuits, lobbying against safe access spaces, and a coordinated push to criminalize the very people who made legalization politically and medically necessary. This article offers a critical counterpart point grounded in legal history, economic reality, and the need for public accountability. Number one, blaming the illicit market equals misdiagnosing the problem. Oh, I'll just close that off there. He's quoted here, illegal products still eclipse every individual licensed producer's market share. The illicit market is the single biggest risk to achieving public policy objectives. And this is what the industry would be saying. Owen says, no, the biggest risk to public policy is a legal market that failed to build trust. Medical patients and everyday consumers alike still turn to legacy suppliers, not because they're criminals, but because the regulated system never met their needs. The so-called illicit market includes indigenous dispensaries operating on sovereign land, compassion clubs and nonprofit collectives, long-time farmers who were excluded from licensing pathways. Industry leaders now ask the government to shut them down. That's not policy, that's erasure. Number two, cherry-picked economic data hides a decade of instability. He quotes them as saying the cannabis industry has added $43 billion to the GDP since legalization. Owen says that's true only if you count indirect and induced impacts. But this number masks the massive write-downs, executive churn, warehouse fires, product recalls, and the collapse of the medical access across Canada. Where is the accountability for laying off thousands of workers, lobbying against safe access for patients, stockpiling cannabis while retail prices collapse? We can't keep rewarding bad faith actors with more deregulation while ignoring the people they pushed out. Number three, excise reform without equity is a bailout in disguise. It says here, he quotes them as saying, replace the $1 gram minimum with a flat 10% rate. Owen says the excise model is broken, especially for small producers. But simply reducing the tax rate without attaching equity conditions amounts to a bailout for the largest LPs. Let's be clear. A fair excise system must be tiered by size and structure. Revenue should fund indigenous economic development, public health, and BIPOC entrepreneurship. No company should benefit from tax cuts unless it can show community reinvestment and labor protections. Number four, national stamp, sure, but with oversight. He quotes them as saying, one national excise stamp will reduce red tape and costs. Owen says, fine, but before centralizing anything, we need transparency on how this will affect inventory, tracking, and diversion risks, guarantees that no private firms will gain monopoly access to data or infrastructure, public disclosure of all lobbying activities related to stamp procurement and packaging reforms. Efficacy without accountability is a recipe for backdoor deals. Number five, global export, not before we fix home. He quotes him as saying, Canada should lead the global market with a bold national export strategy. Owen says, not until all Canadians, including low-income medical patients, have reliable, affordable access. Indigenous nations have control over their own production, export, and taxation policies. Exporters are required to reinvest a percentage of profits back into Canada's public system. Cannabis isn't oil, it's medicine, culture, and food. We mustn't turn it into another extractive industry. Final word, who is missing? This letter was signed by CEOs and trade association executives. Absent were patients, frontline cannabis workers, Indigenous leaders, legal reformers, non-profit cannabis or compassion clubs. Legalization wasn't won in boardrooms. It was won in courtrooms, grow rooms, and the advocacy offices by people now excluded from the table. If this government wants to fix cannabis, it should start by listening to those who earned legalization, not just those who inherited it. Suggestion action for policymakers. Fund low-income patient access. Recognize Indigenous regulatory autonomy. Protect nonprofit medical organizations. Enforce truth in packaging and promotion. Tie excise reform to public interest outcomes. We don't need a bigger pie for corporate Canada. We need to make sure the people who built the kitchen still have a seat at the table. They're here. Way to go, Owen. Way to go. I will post, actually, that article from Owen is available on the Psychedelics and Cannabis Educational News Facebook page. So take a look. Take a look at it. All righty. I'm going to move on to the next story. And there's a lot of stuff in that Owen's story write-up. Is yes. Way to go, Owen. Thumbs up, man. All righty. Moving on to the next story. Talking about BC, we're going to head right back to BC because what's going on there? They've been doing a bit of a survey on things. So here we go. This one comes to me from StratCan. And the headline there says the majority of British Columbians support restrictions on smoking cannabis. British Columbia say they support strict limits on smoking and vaping, including cannabis. A new poll from Research Co. provides a useful snapshot into how British Columbians feel about smoking and vaping tobacco and cannabis in public and even semi-private places around the province. A solid majority of British Columbians polled in the survey, at 77%, say they strongly or moderately support banning smoking, tobacco, and cannabis in multi-family buildings, while 73% would apply such as a ban to electronic cigarettes or e-cigarettes as well. So in other words, if you live in a condominium that you spent $1.5 million on, they don't want you smoking your cannabis. Support for such a ban was shared among those who voted BC NDP in the last election. That was at 80%. BC Conservative 74 and BC Green to 74. Half of British Columbians also said they would strongly or moderately not consider dating a person who smoked cannabis, with 41% of NDP voters being opposed to the idea. 47% of Conservatives opposed and 48% of the Green voters opposed. You can see the chart there. They say about one quarter, that's 23% of British Columbians, told the pollsters that they smoke cannabis, while 19% that they said they smoke cannabis in a non-smokable form like edibles. Males were slightly more likely than females to have reported either of these forms of consumption. This compared to 19% who said that they smoked tobacco in any form, that's cigarette or cigar or a pipe, and 5% who said that they chewed tobacco. 28% of those in British Columbia aged 35 to 54 reported smoking cannabis, while 27% of those aged 18 to 34 reported doing so, and another 15% of those 55 and older reported smoking cannabis. Now, here we go, the big blue lines. That says ban smoking of tobacco and cannabis in multi-family buildings. People in northern BC, much more likely to report smoking cannabis, while Metro Vancouver was the lowest at 19%. BC Green voters were most likely to report smoking cannabis, with 31% of respondents reporting in the affirmative. Meanwhile, 25% of BC Conservative voters reported doing so, while 23% of BC NDP did. And over half the respondents who identified Indigenous reported smoking cannabis, while 27% of the Europeans reported doing so, along with 11% of South Asians and 10% of East Asians. They say the breakdowns were similar for those who reported using a non-smokable form of cannabis. Younger British Columbians were more likely to do so than those 55 and older. Those in northern BC were more likely to report consuming in this fashion, and BC's Green voters were more likely to do so than their NDP or Conservative counterparts. British Columbians were slightly less likely to report smoking tobacco, with just 19% of respondents reporting in the affirmative. Over half reported using no cannabis or tobacco products. So there you go. A bit of a survey of what's going on in British Columbia as far as the cannabis and the things. And from there, I'm going to move on to the next article. And people used to talk about the birds. The birds would sing because they would get the hemp seed that they'd find in the bird seed that people put out in the yards to feed the birds. Well, here we go. Just a story on that. U.S. animal feed officials recognize hemp seed meal for chicken feed. And this comes to me from Gotchapreneur. That's right. The Association of American Feed Control Officials has embraced hemp seed meal as a feed option for chickens in the organization's official publication, a significant step for the industrial hemp and poultry industries. Although the Hemp Feed Coalition heralded hemp seed's appearance in the AAFCO's official publication as an important achievement, the group noted in a press release that the regulatory path to market for hemp feed remains riddled with bureaucratic obstacles. I'm not surprised. Even quoted here in the press release, even after the approval vote in January 2024, many state regulators denied or stalled applications for hemp feed until it appeared in the official publication. Some states went even further, refusing approval until the publication is publicly available in print for a full year. That's 2027. Simply because the first year's edition must be purchased. These delays have nothing to do with science or safety. They're just pure bureaucracy standing on the way of market access. Now, the publication recognized hemp seed meal as a potential feed option for laying hens specifically. Now, Andrew Bish, the president of HFC, says that while the lengthy approval processes are frustrating, the process is nevertheless important as it moves hemp closer to functioning as a real agricultural commodity. Every new approval, like HSM for poultry, opened doors for farmers to access new markets and diversify their operation, he says. And the HFC said it would next pursue approval for the use of hemp seed meal for the ruminants, including cattle, goats, and sheep. 2027. Wow, that's all that gets approved well before then. That's crazy. Having to wait that long. There must be something that unless it's doing studies or anything, it doesn't really explain why it would take so long. But I'm sure there'll be more news that will come along with it that will eventually enlighten us on why. As more publications cover that story. So, all right, moving on to my last story of the day. It comes to me from StratCan. It says the growing conservative push against legal cannabis. When Canada legalized cannabis for adult use in 2018, it was a big step in what felt like an inevitable progression towards more sensible cannabis policies around the world. However, some 7 years later, much of that momentum seems to have stalled, while a growing number of pundits and politicians, primarily on the right side of the political spectrum are pushing back. However, some 7 years later, much of that momentum seems to be stalled, while a growing number of pundits and politicians, primarily on the right side of the pundits, are pushing back what many had long hoped foreseen to finally be coming to fruition. Looks like they got two paragraphs almost identical back to back. Now, in 2013, Uruguay became the first nation to legalize recreational cannabis, followed by several more U.S. states in the coming years. In 2017, Catalonia also legalized. While many countries followed with different approaches to legalizing and regulating cannabis for medical purposes, or even decriminalizing it for adult use, in many ways it seems Canada may have been a high watermark, not one step in a more sensible reconsideration of the world's approach to cannabis, sativa, the cannabis. Momentum stalled? They question. Now, in 2020, a referendum in New Zealand on whether or not to legalize cannabis failed by a slim margin, and in 2024, the Australian Senate voted to discontinue debating a cannabis legalization bill. What seemed like a big step forward in Germany in early 2024 when it legalized limited possession and cultivation, and later that year, adult-only nonprofit cannabis social clubs, stopped short of allowing adult use sales. The law has now faced pushback from the recently elected conservative Christian Democratic Union government. Medical cannabis laws in many countries are now also facing pushback. Health authorities in New Zealand recently announced they are going after medical cannabis clinics that are violating the country's advertising restrictions. The health authority in Australia recently launched a public consultation on unapproved medical cannabis products. In Canada, the health regulatory has been making similar efforts to push back against a handful of physicians it has for years said are connected to a large number of high gram a day authorizations for cannabis, often connected to large personal or designated production licenses. And in the U.S., the sleeping giant that many are expecting to be one of the next big markets to finally legalize cannabis, conservative political pundits continue to rail against cannabis in many forms. Mega podcaster and right-wing personality Charlie Kirk recently expressed strong opposition to the recent rumors that President Donald Trump is considering reclassifying cannabis as a less dangerous drug, arguing that everything already smells like weed. Kirk says, "I hope this doesn't happen. We need to protect public spaces for kids. Everything already smells like weed, which is ridiculous. Let's make it harder to ruin public places, not easier." The very conservative American Heritage Foundation also recently posted a piece about the supposed failure of cannabis legalization to eliminate the illicit market. The opinion piece perpetuates a common trope, a straw man, in which the legalization of was supposedly promised to completely and immediately eradicate the black market. While the Heritage Foundation, which is a big Trump supporter, is an American conservative think tank, it also focuses on Canada extensively in the report. At one point, a convenient and ominous quote says, "The extinction of the black market is the chief philosophy of argument for legalizing cannabis. If anything, legalization has forced hordes of stoners namely low income, to continue to rely on the streets. It's a great example of one of the many contradictions social conservatives make when attacking cannabis legalization. On one hand, they oppose it outright because cannabis is bad. Okay. On the other hand, they pretend to make concerns about the poor and marginalized supposedly being negatively impacted by legalization. In reality, if you look at some of the key voices to lead up to legalization in Canada, Anne McCollum, who led the federal government's task force on legalization, told StratCan in 2020 she expected the process to take a decade to reach about an 80% share of the legal market. The notion that cannabis legalization was promoted as a way to end a deeply embedded black market instantly is simply not supported by the facts, just feelings. And 6 years in, based on polling that helped Statistics Canada create a baseline prior to legalization, the legal market has already captured about 75% of the market. And prior to legalization in Canada in 2018, unless one was assessing Canada's medical cannabis program, 100% of cannabis in the country was not legal. To go with that, 75% in just 5 or 6 years is noteworthy. On top of that, 100% is never going to be likely for a highly controlled substance like cannabis. It's similar to other products in that category. The LCBO estimates that illegal sales account for 19.7% of the Ontario alcoholic drinks market. In tobacco, the rate is much higher, sometimes more than 50% of the market. Many similar arguments are being made built on similarly flimsy or outright made up premises. Claims that cannabis use has become more prevalent are another example. The objection that legalization has led to cannabis smoke being everywhere was raised by conservatives in the U.S. against Florida's legalization efforts in 2024, which ultimately failed. The conflation of cannabis legalization with other drug-related issues like the opioid epidemic is also common. In Canada, we can see one recent example in the House of Commons, when conservative MP in British Columbia, At-Eze, implied that low overdose rate in their community was related to the fact that the city had also banned cannabis stores. In 2024, then Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre tried to play fast and loose with a similar argument, connecting legalization with tens of thousands of deaths. While Poilievre tried to backpedal by saying he was referring to the recent decriminalization efforts concerning personal possession of small amounts of certain hard drugs in BC, the argument is common enough to reveal a theme. Rather than focusing on economic opportunities within the cannabis industry or on the bureaucracy-friendly nature of legalization in Canada under the Liberals, the Conservatives seem more interested in continuing to discuss cannabis in the same breath as drugs like fentanyl or heroin, acting as if we can revert to a century of failed pro-business policies. Similarly, we've seen misleading reports that exaggerate the impact that cannabis use and legalization have had on the road. Politicians who oppose cannabis legalization like to routinely conflate data that shows that the presence of cannabis in someone's system with impairment or even with causing an accident. Now, it goes on to say an opinion piece penned by a Conservative MP in BC in 2024 claimed legalization has undermined road safety, even though the evidence shows that cannabis legalization is not associated with increases in traffic injuries in Canada. Similarly, in 2024, a study in Ontario looked at the effects of edible cannabis on simulated driving and blood THC levels, found that driving impairment was not correlated with blood THC. One Conservative MP in 2024 even went as far to say that he would recriminalize cannabis if given a chance. Yes, I remember that. And he was actually talking to a liberal MP who has Crohn's disease, and he told that MP that, yeah, I would put your ass right back in jail. Sad. Such sentiments from the conservatives around cannabis are not uncommon. Marilyn Gladue, conservative MP for Sarnia, Lambton, who has a storied anti-cannabis history in the House, is one of those who led the charge to oppose legalization in the first place, has long said the party would push back on legalization. In 2019, she told the Globe and Mail that the party wouldn't roll back cannabis legalization, but would like to make major changes to it, including raising the age of access, banning home grows, including medical. Do I need to repeat that? Banning home grows, including medical. Supporting larger companies over smaller ones, while also wanting to pare back packaging restrictions for foods and drinks. Recently, another MP in Ontario has called on the federal health minister to look at issues with medical cannabis home grows. Conservatives have also continued to call for an end to a medical cannabis loophole. Yes, they've been mentioning that for a long time. Now that much of the hype of legalization has faded and the stock market millionaires have all packed up and moved on to greener pastures, they seem to see little reason even to pretend to be pro-cannabis. They can once again point to the specter of a scary marijuana as a cause and symptom of society's ills. The political winds of the world currently seem to be moving to the right of the political spectrum. And if this continues, I expect those kinds of indigenous arguments against cannabis legalization will only increase. While Republican voters often say they are supportive of cannabis legalization, Republicans in several U.S. states have been responsible for pushing back against the voters' efforts to legalize. All of this highlights two key fallacies in the cannabis community and those investing in the industry. The first is that legalization is inevitable. The second is that conservatives support legalization because it's a revenue generator in prohibition, and prohibition is big government. What we see instead is that conservative politicians and pundits continue to revel in old, outdated, reefer madness, prohibition-era talking points about the danger of cannabis, not the benefits of legalization from a standpoint of personal freedom. As the U.S. continues to debate legalization, and some speculate the U.S. president will enact it, it would be wise to take into account that not only is this progress not inevitable, but there's a growing pushback against it, especially among the right-wing politicians controlling not only the U.S., but many other countries around the world. Progress is not inevitable, at least not in the short term. The sentiment that held back sensible cannabis policy for a century, led by the U.S., remains and appears to be gaining ground again. That's ground, people, that we have to shut down. That's for sure. It's there's been too much work has been done. Too much work has been succeeded for it to be just pushed back and eliminated. People have been fighting for cannabis legalization since it's been illegal, and it's just growing constantly all the time. Why push back? It's what the people want. Do we not elect governments to represent the people and what the people want? If people want legalized cannabis, then give them to them. It just makes sense to me. They have lots of ways of doing it. And there's lots of examples around the world. Take your pick, mix and match everything together. And, a lot of people would just rather see it completely removed from the control, substances banned, and be legal like tomatoes. And be able to sell your cannabis at farmers markets, being that cannabis is an agricultural crop. Right? It's a plant. It grows in the ground, just like corn and tomatoes do. So, all right, people. Other than that, that's the news for today. Thanks to our buds at the Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, At-Eze.ca, and Limestone City Hydroponics.ca. And in closing, as I always say, we'd like to thank you guys all for tuning in, for watching or listening, depending on where you're catching us at. And as I always say, I've been saying this for the last 15 or more years. I can say more years. Don't forget to educate, medicate, and do not incarcerate.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.